Hello, everyone, and welcome to Going Global, a legal podcast for today's global challenge. In this episode, titled Global Law and Extractivism, we explore the legal dimensions of extractivism in an increasingly complex and divided global landscape. This podcast is a collaborative initiative between São Paulo State University, Unesp, represented by Livia Porto and Luísa Sasaki, and Newcastle University, represented by Ekaterina Iosifova and Cadence Willis. Joined by Professor Eduardo Saad Diniz, who holds a habilitation in criminology and a PhD in criminal law from the University of São Paulo, USP, and João Victor Gianecchini, a PhD candidate at the University of Frankfurt in Germany, a Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Fellow, and holder of an LLM from USP. This is the second part of our Global Law and Extractivism podcast. In this part, we will focus on environment issues in light of global geopolitics. Have a pleasant listening experience.
This our second question is the world is underground the transition and a global geopolitics, and the environment was become a major topic of discussion. In this context, how we have a global political disputes influences decisions making regarding the climate crisis. Can we still talking about multilateralism, and if not, is there another solution to a global problem such as environment want?
Well, João, I will start it again, okay? If you don't mind, because I wanted to give back the and prophesize just by saying, where is this debate? That I can't see this debate, you know? I see a word that neglects climate mitigation, that not to mention that denies the desperate need of climate mitigation, and very shy policies oriented to climate adaptation, with very few evidences on what exactly works related to climate adaptation. So, and I see philosophers, very smart ones, just saying that we should learn how to die, and we should simply shift the concept of sustainability to the concept of habitability, because the entire equatorial zone of this planet would be inhabitable very soon. So this is what I see. You know, maybe I'm too biased and I'm too paranoid. And I hope that I'm paranoid in that sense. I hope that I'm wrong here. But having said that, our solutions, they are very traditional, still very traditional. Our legal tradition, if I can say things like this, um, they are highly oriented in old age solutions, such as more money. Oh, let us give them some money. Then, okay, so you guys, you take care of the Amazon for us, okay? Just for instance, did you know that the UK government already gave more than $100 million to the Amazon Fund? You were highly supportive of the Amazon preservation with your own taxes. Where's that money? Do you know something about that? Have you ever worried about non-financings on where your money? I'm not talking about the Brazilian money right now. I'm talking about the British posture related to the Amazon preservation. Where's that money? 100 million. It's a lot of money. I can ensure that, right? So there are a couple of organizational frauds ongoing. There are a couple of things that undermine climate finance as well, right? We are simply replicating mistakes that we did related to poverty alleviation during the 80s, during the 90s. We are replicating almost the same way that we, let me say, that we don't took very seriously after the post-COVID area. Yeah, and then we are doing the same thing related to the planetary debates, to the planetary boundaries. Yeah, why is it so? Because they are so diffuse. They are right now. We are polluting a lot. We are causing a lot of climate harm. All of us here, right? there are only two territories. That's why I'm so obsessed with the idea of territory, Katherine. There are two territories where you can work directly, where you can intervene directly, and they are at the equatorial zone. And in the geological past, they were the same ecosystem, the Amazon rainforest and the African Sahel. Yeah, so we should be creating pluralistic approaches for international policies in those particular fields. We should our experimental sciences, everything that we are trying to conceive related to legal imagination in the planetary debate, or even it's wrong. Also, Ron knows a lot about that in the Anthropocene. Yeah, that should be highly focused on those particular areas, because then we can measure very easily what works and what doesn't, what is promising, and what exactly we should be doing after the collapse that is forthcoming. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, thanks a lot for the answer for the new challenging question as well. I think you're completely right, Eduardo. What I tried to maybe pose was maybe a new way of trying to frame the problem, but not that is happening right now. Maybe something that we should engage critically and think about as a possible, the beginning of a possible solution to really tackle such a complex challenge. But yes, I think I would agree with you that the analysis right now, the analysis that we have that we can really see are not so promising. And I think that connects very well to the question that has been posed right now, the second question that we're engaging today, which is the question of multilateralism, right? And is there still a place for multilateralism in engaging with the very challenging situation of the environment and environmental exploitation and harms being committed in the current context? And well, I think multilateralism, yes, it's very interesting that we are thinking about that, but I think what we really see right now is a new strategy of domination, not anymore of multilateralism as we could see until maybe last year or before that, but in which multilateralism understanding as many nations trying to pose different solutions or different challenges and coming up with different solutions, engaging it with a more or less equal manner towards these solutions and also problems, and trying to dialogue about that. What I think we now see is the contrary of what multilateralism would really mean. I think what we can see, the current state of wars spreading throughout the world, is a new challenge of domination, and domination by many, and by maybe some countries that are trying to pose a new agenda, this very critical agendas that we are trying to discuss today. So as environmental perspectives, also critical perspectives on oil and gas and the production and the commercialization of oil and gas throughout the world. And the imposition of this challenge, the imposition of this agenda, better saying, is something that maybe is against what we have seen so far as strategies for the protection of the environment. I think what we see nowadays, if you will, Eduardo, maybe you can also critically engage with that, but is maybe a global rollback of the agenda and not anymore just a Brazilian rollback. We can see a global one, and also sponsored maybe by a new strategy of domination, as I would see it in the international sphere. So thanks for the question.
Outstanding. Very good concept.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answers. I'd love to expand on your answers, in the sense that I really like how it was framed, that there is now not only the local rollback, but also the global rollback. And we actually can see that with the resurgence of populism and sovereignty claims by the states that are now abstaining from the international cooperation that they basically devoted themselves after the Second World War. In this regard to environmental issues, I'd really love to ask that one of the potential solutions that were mentioned in your article was the framework of green criminology and victimology that could address this state-facilitated corporate crime. And how do you think the instrument of this framework would be possible if it was adopted on a global scale? Would it increase accountability and awareness within the Brazil as well? Because we have seen that the recently adopted UNGA resolution that internationally recognized for the first time the right to a healthy environment. Brazil hasn't abstained. Brazil has supported this resolution, which was 4 years ago. And given that, if there was any framework on green victimology, criminology adopted on, for example, the UN level, would it help to enforce accountability and find solutions within Brazil?
Well, thanks a lot. May I begin with this one, Eduardo? Great. So thanks. Very good question as well. I think it's a question that maybe brings us to a point where we can maybe try to think analytically on the first hand, and then maybe try to operationalize a little bit of the right to a healthy environment, so to say. I think if we think analytically on the first hand and try to understand what green criminology really poses to us as a research agenda that also connects with the political agenda, the legal policy agendas as well. So I think maybe this is the first thing that or maybe it's the thing that we should start with. And what we tried to do in our paper, and I think maybe we could also further develop it here, is try to think of green criminology as a strategy towards understanding harmful behavior. And in our perspective there, what we tried to do was to understand the coupling between environmentally and socially harmful behavior, how one is connected to the other, how one reproduces the other and deepens the other. And I think these dynamics of understanding harmful behavior are very important for us to understand also the dynamics of victimization. So who perpetrates harm, and on the other hand, who is being victimized by this harm? What is really happening there in the local context, and also thinking maybe in the connection between the local and the global context. So I think if we understand criminology and green criminology and then try to couple with green victimology, which is something that we try to do there, we can maybe offer an analytical framework towards understanding the complex issues that we are facing there. And there, what we could see was this convergence between social harm, between environmental harm, and we could also see that, and we tried to merge and to bridge these agendas of green criminology also with political economy, and also how that relates to regulation studies, so how that really relates to the regulatory rollback that we faced and that we saw in the region during the Bolsonaro agenda in Brazil, but not just Bolsonaro, that was happening also in other governments as well, which is also something that may be interesting. And we can see that when we analyze these regulatory rollbacks, we can also see and maybe critically engage with law and with regulation there. Because what we can see in Brazil, and now I will try to connect with the second part of our question, which is the one related to the right to a healthy environment. In Brazil, we have that since 1988 with our constitution. Maybe even before that, but in the constitutional framework since 1988. So it's not something so new for us, right? But what we don't have, and maybe we're still struggling to deal with that, is how maybe to enforce that, or how to maybe really develop mechanisms that will be able to really develop the opportunities, develop the strategies to really endorse that, really enforce that in the end. And what we could see, and then critically engaging with law as well, is that these laws, they may have this frame of trying to protect the environment, to offer and to try to maybe practically enforce the right to environment, to create these strategies, but that they also have maybe an upside. And the upside would be some kind of normative openness, structures, or also maybe some kinds of very specific parts of the legislations that opens up the opportunity for new regulations that can also be able to restrict the application of these norms. And when we can see that these parts of the legislation that can be altered through regulations, when we see the political agenda of the regulations that are then enacted towards protecting the environment, maybe they can also open up opportunities for further producing harmful behavior in this kind of environment. And that is something that we try to do in our text, trying to understand how, through our own legislation that tries to protect the environment, how these pieces of legislation also open the opportunity for the regulatory rollbacks. And then in the regulatory rollbacks, we could see that the political interest could really instrumentalize these spaces in the legislation, these spaces of opportunity, if you will, or these openers in the legislation, if you will, how they instrumentalized that into engaging with an agenda that was in the end against the environment and maybe pro interests of a small elite, but very powerful elite that was trying really to exploit these critical scenarios and further producing harmful behavior there. So maybe this would be the answer, to try to start engaging with the discussion.
Well, it's so impressive how you systematize all the knowledge around the paper, João. Thanks a lot for that. I can only add here some very personal approaches here, which is I pretty much like your language, Katherine. You say, I want to expand it. It's already very broad. But my resentment as an academic is every time that we need to put, our souls in the papers and then trying to emotionally engage in something as powerful as the fact that we are destroying the planet. Yeah. Then come the revisions. They come and say, okay, you need a narrow approach, you need a narrow research question. So thanks a lot for allowing us at least here this opportunity to expand it a little bit, Related to the fact that I was such a frustrated scholar, allow me to share with you my resentment here. I tried, I don't know for how many years, I was discussing that with Luísa as well. I tried to be a scholar on corporate crime, right? I tried to follow the corporate crime scholarship. I tried to study, as Luísa, we were discussing earlier today, all the discussion related to corruption, all this research agenda, etc. And I could never come up with a new thesis, something that could express the true Brazilian needs, because everything was international inputs that I brought to the Brazilian legal theory or to the Brazilian social thoughts. So I failed systematically in producing a knowledge. But why is it so? It's only because I'm resent or because I am vira-lata, as we usually in Brazil, because I am a subaltern or because I don't have sufficient skills. No, to begin with, I'm not sure if you are familiar with the fact that the Brazilian laws on corporate criminal liability, they are reduced to a couple of environmental offenses. So you have huge environmental disasters. You have tragedies, you have centuries of indiscriminate exploitation of natural resources, and then the most powerful instrument of formal social control we simply don't have access to. So this is somehow why I simply move it, from the legal scholarship to the criminological. I don't want to sound arrogant and say that I'm a criminologist, because I don't have proper background on that. But to criminological research, I try to be inspired by some criminological thoughts. And one of them is from Edwin Sutherland, as old as, 80 years ago. He just said, forget the laws. Start looking at the harmful behavior, as João just addressed it here. And then you can start understanding what are the causes, of all those wrongdoings. So what are the causes of all those negative impacts of those, actors that cause environmental degradation and cause environmental plus climate harm. So this is somehow the key that we borrowed from Edwin Sutherland in that sense. And then from Sutherland on, right, if you look at the social control theory literature, you're going to see a treasure of possible solutions. They are highly creative. Their imagination is unbelievably rich, such as the fact that we can't rely solely on our legal scholarship, on our legal traditions, on our legal tools, because we are failing systematically and we are watching, observing, helpless, the rise of private regulation. The private sector, is showing us what is conceiving for us, what is sustainability, what are the ESG indicators, what are the net zero protocols, blah, blah, blah. They are driving not only the international agreements, but also the way we look at the social license to exploit the environment, and what is the legitimate source of it all. And that's the main argument here. Who told them that they can do that for us? Yeah, our challenge here, this is why I would love to keep collaborating with you in very good empirical research here to at least to try to understand the social motivation of the new generation that maybe could be the last generation. Trying to understand, okay, the private sector can bring us a lot of prosperity as well. Why should we look at them and say, okay, you're bringing only negative impact? No, they're bringing a lot of prosperity. Yeah, they are allowing us, for instance, to have a conversation from Germany to UK and then to Brazil, right? So that's something that we could be adding to those shared goals, a different way of seeing the shared prosperity that we can extract from the private sector.
Yes, thank you very much for your answer. I think that due to the globalization, the presence of private actors in transnational law, for example, also gives rise to certain concerns. However, I think that while we should pay attention to maybe not really traditional legal measures and law as itself, but I do not particularly think that the utopian approach, global soft law approach, while it exists, since it is not legally binding as national regulation, the states that do not comply with it. And while we may think and develop the ideas about harmful behavior, I don't particularly believe that as long as we cannot put it in a very clear and precise framework for the states to adopt and implement, we can achieve some maybe more practical results, because what these old declarations and resolutions give, and what mostly the constitutions as such as Brazilian that recognize the right to a healthy environment, for example, they give a very vague approach and vague definition of what this right is. And as long as we don't put these vague definitions into maybe more narrow measures and with direct instructions, guidelines, how exactly we should preserve the right and how exactly we should address the problem without just taking a very, ambiguous approach that may be understood differently within the countries, given the differentiated legal traditions and also the cultural understandings about the problem. Because, for example, the environment is understood very differently by indigenous communities than, for example, the European citizens. And despite this scholarship and the development of these ideas of new system, green victimology, criminology is very crucial in thinking and how we then further develop practical measures that can be adopted by the states and that for which we can hold them accountable. Livia, I'm so sorry. If I may jump in before we go on to the second question, I'd have some comments on the answer of the first one, if I may raise them. So I really liked how you both framed this issue by bringing it at the local level and what problems are present there, and then going that it is not only the problem at the local level, that there are many countries indeed that possesses maybe greater economic power to do this very green decisions, for example, about electric cars, and that we indeed in a way exploit the southern countries in the south. So I'd say my question would be in this regard, where exactly, so Professor Eduardo, you have mentioned that there should be a complete reshape of the policies in the Brazil, in the way that we should address the social aspect, social policies, and the indigenous communities that now suffer the most from these practices. And the question is where exactly this shift should occur, because there are countries with greater political and economic power that may be exploiting the resources. And given that Brazilian economy relies on this extractivism, where exactly this shift should happen, on what level should it happen in Brazil, or should it be more a pressure from, for example, international organizations? Because you have mentioned in the article that there was a criticism from the international community, that there was a letter from a few companies, 41 as far as I remember, that refused to participate and provide Brazil with necessary resources until the situation, the position on the illegal mining and taking more safeguarding measures will not be taken. So do you think that is it possible for this reshape to happen within the current Brazilian government? Or, for example, as this criticism from the international community, it should be a pushback, and also the recognition of countries from the north that this is happening, and they also have a responsibility for this and a key role to accommodate Brazil with the necessary, in a sense, maybe solutions or maybe practices, measures, technologies to resolve this problem?
Oh wow! What a great question! What a complex question. I will try to organize my answer here, and of course that I would love to ask for João's help in this regard as well. João is doing his research in one of the leading schools on planetary sciences there. So please feel free to add any comment at any time. Okay, João. And Katherine, if I may ask you, please don't call me professor. So I just left my tenure at the university. Just a quarter is enough for me. Yeah. The most important thing is for us to have a powerful debate as we are trying to establish here, right? Your question, I will summarize it in one single word. Yeah. You asked me where, and that's for me, that's the most precious question, because that brings us a room for something that is not exactly well received internationally, which is the idea of territorial justice. It's in the territory. Thanks for the opportunity to say it in this podcast. Yeah, it's in the territory. And then our social theory, the Brazilian social theory, it's huge. It's immense on territory. It's so rich and it's so powerful. And it's very hard, just making a short comment on Livia's question on multilateralism. It's so hard to understand the world in such a homogeneous packets, you know. Even universalist approaches are nowadays so outdated. Of course, they are all under strain here, yeah? Of course, that a more pluralistic approach should be driving everything that we conceive under global laws, right? It's very hard to conceive the world in a homogeneous and universalistic way, but also it's very hard to conceive the Amazonia as something homogeneous. Oh, yeah, it's a couple of trees there. It's a rainforest or something in the tropics, you know? No, there's so many Amazonians. The territory is so rich, right? The level of complexity in the territory is more than plural here. Let us begin with one thing that is maybe a common grammar in this territory. Yeah, the crazy colonial legacy that nobody knows who owns land. Land rights, land tenure, land use, and land governance. It's a universal grammar wherever you go in the Amazon. It doesn't matter if it's in the Brazilian, in Venezuela, Colombia. Nobody knows. Only, or not only, so not precise this data, but only 10% of the land there, you know, of the communities there, they have land tenure. 10%. That's crazy. In that huge area, you know. That's the beginning of all conflicts. The root cause of almost all conflicts in the Amazon is the fact that I don't know who owns the land. Yeah. And why does it matter a lot to understand environmental legislation, but also to understand the role of international, I don't like the word intervention because it can be, so harsh. Very easily it could be captured by populist approaches. Yeah. But international collaborations or international alliances or international, please help me with something better, with a better word than that. Yeah. So if you look at the territory, its own dimensions, and in a very Brazilian way, the used territory, it's Milton Santos, is geographer. I've been discussing that a lot with Leonardo. We have some disputes related to this concept, but the used territory is related to the local communities that are living in that territory. Yeah, that's a live territory. Yeah, it's a social related framework to start understanding it all. And once we define it where, yeah, we can start talking about how, right? First of all, land rights. There's a desperate need to focus on land rights in this area. Yeah. I've been visiting, I have the privilege to work with an institution there, which is the Fiocruz Amazonia. Tremendous people. They are doing God's work there. With very few resources, they are doing a tremendous research there. I would love to introduce you to some of those scientists there. I had the privilege to follow them by evaluating the water quality in the area. And then I visited some areas that were already regularized, already submitted to land policies. And what happened, Katherine and Cadence, but also you, maybe Luísa and Livia, they never visited the region, maybe as well. They are literally drinking water from sewage. In the biggest basin of this planet, in the area where the hydrological security is supposed to be the best in the planet, yeah, they don't have access to clean water. So land tenure is very important, but it's only the beginning of it all. Complementary public policy should follow, right? And then, of course, right, we need to establish regulatory policies that preserve an area, but also creates room for proper income to local communities, unless they will, of course, perish, right? You have your income. I know that Giannichini now has a tremendous scholarship there in Frankfurt, right? So they do need income at the same way we do need it, right? Because traditional communities, they were used to take down trees. Very good. My grandfather, my father. And what am I supposed to do? Because of your climate morality, because you're now coming from Newcastle, Unesp, and then you were trying to teach me how to preserve my own nature? Of course that I will break that bridge. Of course that I will disregard everything that you're bringing to me. Of course that you were only incentivizing conflicts in my society or within my communities. That's the point here. So this framework should be aligned this way. And then in a positive agenda, international coalitions, they should be supporting this scaling up of interventions here from one hand. And in the negative aspect, of course, there are powerful criminal networks that are exploiting local resources there. Extractivism is not an abstract category. Yeah, it's something that should be understood also in its concrete dimensions, in concrete realms. Yeah, those criminal networks, they are not only the organized crime that we in the south of Brazil are used to, such as Primeiro Comando da Capital, Comando Vermelho, yeah, those traditional gangs that we do have in the south. They differ a lot according to the territory. They have new formations there, and they are not, in my opinion, that's my opinion. Please judge me for my naivete or for my arrogance in that sense. They are not the most important part of the problem, because they are articulated with something much more powerful, which are the multinational corporations that are exploiting those natural resources in a very indiscriminate way. And they are from US, Canada, Europe, Asia, etc. Yeah, and then, okay, but then we do have supply chain laws. I know that Giannichini knows a lot about that. He, I don't know, he has a tremendous experience in this field as well. Please feel free to add comments here. Yeah, they only create a facade of legality here. Why is it so? If I don't know who owns the land, right? I don't know who owns the land. But Cadence, she does have a land tenure. What she realizes then? That she can sell everything to European or to foreign multinational corporations with everything compliant with our regulatory policies. So why should she produce? Why don't she simply buy everything from her neighbors? It's much easier for her. And then she can sell everything in, certified. Everything enters into the European market certified. Yeah. So the role of these international laws, international regulations, these international coalitions should be also supporting strategies that disrupt those networks. That's my point here. Not only creating a facade of legality, such as João just mentioned before, that simply suppose that we Brazilians, that we can support, a sustainable way of exploiting those resources, that simply suppose that we are the problem. Who were you guys? Where were you guys 80 years ago or 100 years ago when your companies, they brought all those problems for us? And I don't have any resource here. I don't even have a tenor here. And you can imagine that I can simply, everything creates an over-compliance regime here that simply suffocates local communities there. And then I can't, for instance, take down some trees to, let us say, cultivate some chicken to feed my family. I am the criminal then, and then we don't have appropriate tools, to hold those multinational companies accountable for everything, for all wrongdoing that they are bringing to us. Yeah. So this is my first reaction to your complex question. But please, João, help me addressing this answer.
Well, thanks a lot for the question. First of all, Katherine, it's a very challenging and complex issue, as the problems that we face in the Amazon also have a very complex nature and share that. And the questions then also should accompany the challenging environment that we face. Yeah. And also the connections, as Eduardo was saying. And then I thank you a lot for bringing this to the table. That is the why are these problems really connected on the first hand. And that's what I was trying to bring in while answering the first question, which means that we are all connected. When we think about these problems and trying to divide problems in each place of this earth, in each place of this planet, is, I think, at least the way I see it, that is the wrong way. I think we should think it in a more holistic way, trying to understand where is the exploitation coming from and where is it going to in the end. Because this is how we can really understand that this problem is not local. It may be global, if we would, and if you will, bringing and then bridging the global and the local frameworks towards understanding this problem. And then I think that Eduardo touches a very important issue, that is right now this over-reliance on supply chain management on the one hand, if we are going to the management and science and management studies, and then going also to the legal studies of the corporate sustainability due diligence directive and the legislations that come together using the same shape, using the same grammar towards addressing supply chain violations, which means compliance, due diligence, as Eduardo was saying, creating an over-compliance problem there, meaning increasing the costs of production maybe in those spaces, whereas not ensuring that these practices are really sustainable, so to say, if we would like to also use the concept of sustainability here, which is also being challenged right now. And this, I think, is a framework that maybe helps us to reduce a little bit of the complexity, but also tries to offer us a better solution of trying to understand this problem, of why it cannot be just understood as a local problem. No, it's a problem of the Amazon people. The Amazon people that live there, they are the ones who commit these offenses, they commit the crimes. We are here just buying it. We don't have any problem. We are not related to that. I think this is a form of moral neutralization, once again, trying to bring the first rationale again to answer this question, but trying to think, no, we're all connected in the way that the supply chain brings us all together. It brings the violation and it shatters also this production and this communication of the production towards also or with also the developed countries that buy those products and that also engage with these critical sites of production. So I think thinking about that and thinking not in dividing, but in bringing those problems together, we can also think of strategic solutions. As Eduardo understood your question regarding territory, we should think about territory. Of course, I agree with that a lot. And then maybe bringing that or jumping in that question and that rationale, I think we also have to think in territory. We need to think about the people who live there and what kinds of activities or what kinds of opportunities, of life opportunities do these people really have, and how they can really come up with a sustainable way of living, of affording a life in those kinds of, if you will, critical territories. So we also need to think about that and maybe come up with solutions that try to engage in a more practical way, trying to think about, how can we engage and bring better opportunities of sustainable production, of bringing maybe new forms of production that can also enhance the quality of environmental quality in the region, and also education patterns of trying to enhance production quality in those regions in a more sustainable way. So I think that, it's a very complex issue. We could maybe think about that the whole day, and also maybe the next years about that. So thanks for posing it again.
Thank you very much for providing such a detailed response. It's very interesting to hear. Yeah, so if nobody else has anything to add, we can, I think, continue with the second question. If you could repeat that, Livia. Sorry for interrupting.
Well, Katherine, I do have something to add here. And I took a look at my notes here, and then I realized that I didn't answer to your most provocative question, which was the role of local government, right? And I don't want to skip this question, especially in this moment where we're about to face elections here, right? Whenever you speak about rollbacks, what is the hope that we do have here? That there will be a regulatory turn, right? And in my own opinion, that's my opinion, João, please, I can answer, I can be responsible for that if you want. I didn't see that turn in the last 4 years. Very unfortunately. I was expecting it. But if you look at everything that the Yanomami peoples, they suffered there, there is a tremendous nexus between genocide and ecocide in the north of the Amazon, especially in Roraima, which is very close to Venezuela. The mercury catastrophe in the region, the level of conflict in the area is as big as ever. That's my point. We don't have a denialist approach. That's true, but I need much more than denialist approach. I need much more than simply say nothing. That is complicity by silence. That's bystander, if I'm not wrong. And after the climate conference in November last year, I was expecting to see the Amazon rainforest out of the agenda, the political agenda. And why is it so? Because we didn't experience any kind of regulatory turn. Worse than that, the fact that we don't have the construction of a common framework with shared goals around environmental preservation, they are very shy. We need something more substantial. That's what I want to address as my opinion. Because it's a negative asset in the elections. We're about to face elections in October this year. And for the far right trends, Of course, it's an agenda that is not exactly, they're not exactly sympathetic to this agenda. But if you look at the progressive representatives, what are they doing? What are they doing? So, and this is something that undermines our own sovereignty, undermines the capacity that we do have to self-determination. That's the problem, you know. And then you see worldwide trends saying that we need the planetary commons, that we need planetary regulation, that Brazilians should be seen only as custodians of the Amazon, and that would justify at the end. It won't take that much, in my opinion, and that would justify highly paternalistic approaches related to the way that we see the rainforest among us. Yeah.
Okay, so
Should we engage maybe a little bit more in the provocation? I would like to also maybe say some things. I think that the answer is very compelling that Eduardo brought here. It's very, very interesting to think about that. And I think Cadence also wanted to say something. I thought that she also unmuted her microphone, but I will be very brief, and then you can, of course, jump in. I think that this common framework, the way we can see the conflicts and how everything is somehow connected, as we can see, for example, in the discussions regarding planetarity. Yes, I think that this kind of discussion, we have also to understand that we are all connected, and harm is also, in a sense, very much widespread in a planetary way or in a global way, depending on the vocabulary or the concept you want to use. But we also have to see that this local perspective encompasses a local one, and that the local, the critical one, it's the one who needs to be respected. So I think that planetarity does not mean to disengage, or maybe does not mean to not respect sovereignty of the locals, so to say. But I think that the solutions should be the ones who engage with the local communities and local needs regarding that region, and the most disenfranchised of those local communities, and then that they bring the solutions, and the ones that are maybe responsible for supporting it, for endorsing it, for maybe sponsoring it, if we are going to think about more practical ways, then they should maybe endorse and engage with that. But that local sovereignty should be respected, and the solutions maybe should come from there. This would be a critical framework towards planetarity, in my own point of view. Thanks.
And if I may ask, do you think that because of the influence of super national organizations or companies on countries from the global north, has it made it more difficult to establish a global framework and solutions because of those companies? We are seeing that countries from the global north are benefiting and becoming resistant to helping with preventing the issues seen with extractivism.
Shall I begin, João? Right. So very good question, Cadence. I would love to engage in more substantial research on this with you all, guys. Well, the field would be in that sense more on environmental history, maybe, of for instance, the Manaus Railway Company, which, if I'm not wrong, there are a couple of files at the local archives there to do that research, which will allow us to understand a little bit the UK presence in the area, for instance, right, historically. But you have also this continuum, as João was saying, for instance, related to the carbon markets. The UK shareholders are highly present in the area, if I'm not wrong. I just saw the other day, I'm not sure if what I'm saying is accurate enough, but that the Liverpool, the football club, is invested in carbon markets there in the area, for instance, and they majorly disregard also these social dynamics in the in the rainforest. If I don't know who owns the land, there will be coming more and more communities. There's communities that will take more and more trees down, etc., etc. So the carbon that I'm saying that I'm absorbing, I'm actually not absorbing. So that's a very basic concept of greenwashing here, yeah, corporate greenwashing here, in this sense. There is a very smart, corporate greenwashing. I'm also following here some of the ideas that Professor Laufer in US suggests us to follow. But also there is a Swiss scholar, very smart in this area of business and human rights, Dorothy Bauman-Polly. She has been doing very, very, very appealing research in Africa. And then she says, okay, local multinational companies, yeah, they should be held liable, but we shouldn't be simply creating risk aversion in this area. It's not simple like, okay, so choose, go, goodbye, guys. So stay there with your own problems. I don't want to be accomplished with this. I'm out of the country. So then the kind of how those corporations, they were highly intertwined with local communities. Yeah, many of them are even dependent nowadays of those multinational companies. They will simply suffer more and more, with their with the fact that they were simply living the area. So it's not simply threaten multinational corporations is not a way of creating this common framework, right? I would love actually to collaborate with you if you want to create any kind of empirical research that would allow us to understand what should be those shared goals, yeah, those planetary goals, as João was mentioning before. There are a couple of instruments that we could be applying. For instance, if you go, let us assume that the Liverpool is putting money in the area, in the field, right? If you look at the hundreds of managers that work at the Liverpool, yeah, or if you look at all those stakeholders that are around Liverpool activities, are they motivated to create any kind of harm in the Amazon? Of course not. So you can simply evaluate their motivation, their social motivation to do something good, right? To do something that preserve the. So this is a way that we'll be extracting the shared goals coming from the employees, from all stakeholders involved in that as well. Yeah. Is it possible to create any bridge from those guys that are, let us say, in UK, and from those who are at the front in riverside communities? Yeah. How we can create that bridge? So then we can start talking about this common framework that should be driven environmental regulation, right? Or environmental policies here and there. That would be the kind of research that I would love to be doing with you guys. And that will show us a lot of, uh, let me borrow this word, humility here, because we've been highly focused on the internal validity of everything that we're doing, our legal theories, our justice frameworks, etc. And we simply neglect the external validity, the need to be a little bit more humble and to be sensitive to the local context.
Yeah, thanks. Also, challenging, interesting question. And the way I understood the question was like more the way that maybe these global players, most powerful players, are kind of monopolizing the subjects that we're talking about, or monopolizing the way they understand the problem and trying to impose some kind of solutions to these challenging environments, if you will. And I think it's the way the question was framed is also interesting to see, and also the kind of solutions that we're facing. And then we go back again to the solutions that we have nowadays in the legal maybe domain, and also in the supply chain management domain. We can see that it's proliferation of different kinds of legislations, trying to pose new kinds of regulatory burdens, and trying also to impose a framework towards understanding the problem, as if the only problem in those kinds of regions will be illegal emissions, and trying maybe to criminalize emissions, CO2 emissions in that sense, carbon emissions, And I think that the way they frame the problem and the way they understand it is just a way of understanding it that does not really critically engage to the complex reality of the dynamics that are happening in the region. And I think that if we try to impose this kind of grammar, we also tend maybe to not understand the root causes of what is really happening there. What are the complex dynamics that are happening there? Why is it that some kinds of behavior are being committed in these kinds of critical settings? And if we label them all as criminal, all as a moral blame that these people, these locals have to bear, then we are maybe acting, as Eduardo said, while answering the first question, very selectively and not really engaging with critical solutions that would really fit the challenges that we should face right now.
Thank you very much for answering. The reason I brought this question is because, so first of all, there is definitely with the current government in Brazil a certain level of doubt that these environmental issues can be dealt with effectively, with the President Bolsonaro cutting the funding for NGOs and eco-territories, and also with the changes to the forest code. It just seems hard how we can change it on the local level at first. And thank you, Cadence, for raising the question with the international organizations, because we see that international organizations on their spectrum are influencing and are doing more harm and are causing these problems in a greater manner, in addition with the inadequate regulations, local regulations in Brazil. And I think that's just to keep a question in mind. And I think what we're looking in this discussion and in general is that in developing this global framework, how we address the presence of international organizations, how do we hold them accountable, and how we at the same time still take into account the national sovereignty, the Brazilian sovereignty, and this territorial justice, as you've said, and how we trying to resolve it on a global scale with the international organizations, and at the same time being sensitive to the local context. And where do we find consensus and the shared values in developing the approach that we can take in solving this problem? So, yeah. I think we can now move on to our second question, Livia.
Well, very challenging question as well, Katherine. I think that you're right when you say that, yes, if we stick to the non-binding forms of regulation, non-binding forms of legal patterns, then we tend to have just a very form of maybe soft law requirements, and then these would have maybe a just low level, if you will, of acceptability, or really maybe the power of transforming challenging scenarios, so to say. And I tend to agree with what you say, but I tend to also see critically the way we see law as well. I think it's not just a problem of soft law mechanisms, but also a problem of domestic law mechanisms. I think seeing law, and always seeing law as a solution for all the social, economic, environmental problems that we have, I think that we should also see that maybe critically. I don't think that law should be, on the one hand, the only solution. On the other hand, I think that law can also be the source of problems, and the source of problems that we are facing today with environmental exploitation, economic exploitation, they are also problems that have been created through law. And I think law has also a very powerful role in further creating and reproducing the problems that we see nowadays. And maybe we should think about also other perspectives than not just law. I think that would be my take. I think I also have to develop much further on that kind of analysis, but that would be my take as well.
Well, if you look at the experiences, right, they are at least trying to be a little bit more cautious, yeah, in this field, because they are implementing here, there are a couple of sandboxes, and then try to understand what works, what doesn't, etc. They're testing it. I mean, I appreciate your approach on we need direct interventions that work, right? We don't have time anymore for idealistic approach. We appreciate the symbolic power of international laws that increase the legal weight here and there, but thanks, we need something more powerful, right? I can be misunderstood as being so positivistic in this sense if I say that we need more experimentalism, but we do need more, much more experimentalism because we need evidences here, right? So we don't have time anymore to be talking about environmental policies without being properly grounded by evidences. But here I have another resentment that I want to share with you, which is I could never be a proper experimentalist as well. um, I've been following this literature tremendous. It's a fascinating literature on the gold standard of evidences. On the, oh no, gold standard is too hard. We need the Brosen standard. It's enough for us. Let us be. Let us rely on the statistics. Let the data science are coming, etc. And then I never published that short essay that I wrote on the grass standard. El padrão latão. I'm not sure if they will understand the word grass wrong. Just a second. I'm gonna check this word. Breast. I'm sorry. The brass standard. Yeah, the brass standard was everything that I could do. Yeah, which is what is possible to do. And now it's not only a question of lack of resources, lack of capacities that I never had, for instance, a proper background in criminology, but it's the desperate need of something of using, borrowing your language, direct interventions. Yeah, I'm sorry, direct instructions, right? You said direct instructions on what we should be doing. So I don't have time for the gold standard anymore. So I need things that can very fast adapt, foster resilience within the communities, and at the same time, this in the aggregate that should somehow has an impact in climate mitigation. That's the brass standard, from one hand to the other. And I think that here João can add much more substance on what I have to say because he's more familiar with this literature than I am. But we have nothing actually to bring to local communities. I spent some time with a great friend of us, Professor Mosquito Garrido, yeah, our Angolan brother in Africa. I had the privilege to interview a couple of local communities in Africa as well, in Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Mozambique, and Angola. And it's fascinating how there is a common ground, a common understanding on those communities that we have nothing to offer to them, right? Our technicalities, our tools, our sciences, they mean nothing for them. So this bridge, we are suffering, right? Let me call we progressives. We are suffering to create a way of being more prone to this cultural openness, right? But we have nothing to share them. That's the point here.
Thank you very much for your answers. Anyone else has anything to add, or we can move on to the third question?
I have a question. I was thinking while you discuss about this, and the energy transition requires an increase in mining activity, but while this is an environment agenda, this activity has environment impacts, especially on the local communities, and the regulation can address this contradiction. We can speak in regulation about this activity and protect the environment.
Well, João, if you allow me, I will begin here. So, same way as we did in our experiences with corporate governance, corruption, money laundering, etc., that we need desperately risk assessment. Here, that's the same thing. We need a materiality map. We need to understand who are the stakeholders, how and who is being harmed by the corporate activity here, right? And then try to create measures to compensate it. That's the basics in this matter. I agree with you. If you look at the electric cars, lithium is scarce. If we try to bring energy from the space, it's also scarce in that sense. So the main point here is we need to understand the fact that The way that we live in this planet should be reshaped. Yeah. I don't want to be so romantic here, but in a more realistic approach, there is no space here for freedom of choice anymore. We change it or we change it. It's subjective. That's the approach that your generation, Luísa, should be saying. The fact that we don't have a next generation to test another alternative, lithium batteries, solar energy coming from the space. We don't have another opportunity anymore. We change it or we are the last. So we should be simply saying goodbye to the liberal tradition that is highly based on the freedom of action here.
Well, yes, I could only agree with Eduardo in what he's saying. And, well, I think that maybe another part of the question, if I understood it correctly, would be that the role of regulation in this new scenario, in these new emerging critical scenarios of energy transition, of the environmental impacts of or caused by the new energy transition, so to say. And if I understood it correctly, and trying to understand what really means, speaking about or speaking of regulation in this new emerging scenario, I think we should also be able to understand which kind of regulations we already have. And of course, then I would try to come up or try to address the Brazilian perspective, because I don't know any other scenarios enough to talk about them. But I think in the Brazilian scenario, we are really lagging behind in what we can understand of regulating energy transition. Yeah. And also not just energy transition, but also when we are speaking about critical minerals and the new activities regarding the mining sector, I think that we are still lagging behind, and we still need to address these topics through new legal discussions, through new regulation that could really understand what kind of transition we need. And I think then we should maybe try to bridge the gap between what do we mean by the political discussion regarding the energy transition, and then with bridging the gap with what we understand as how to maybe nudge this energy transition through law and through regulation. Yeah, I think. But what I tend to say, and what I tend to understand here, is that we are maybe still lagging behind on new kinds of discussions regarding that, and we are still focused maybe on old and in the sense old classic or traditional forms of production. If you can see, for example, in the not in this case, not in the energy transition, but if we address, for example, the critical minerals perspective, in Brazil, we still have a regulation that is from the period of military dictatorship. Yeah, so the Código de Minas, if I could maybe translate it as that, maybe the mining code, as we would translate that to English. Yeah. The mining code. Look, it's a regulation maybe to engage with our international colleagues here. The regulation from 1967, which was 3 years after our military dictatorship began. So it's a really different scenario of what we are seeing right now with critical minerals, and what kind of discussion regarding critical minerals. And so that's what I mean when I say that we need more political activity in the country regarding that, new challenges, new perspectives on that, so that maybe after discussing that politically, we could maybe come up with new regulations, new forms of legislation that could address that in the way that we should maybe address, on the one hand, harm, and maybe on the other hand, try to push for more sustainable practices on the other hand. Yeah, maybe that would be a beginning.
Well, if I can add something here as well, João, in this particular sense, I agree with some of the assumptions of the planetary commons, especially those led by the Swedish scientist Rockström, yeah? Especially when he defines the planetary boundaries. Yeah, he uses this language, Katherine, he uses safe operating space. Yeah, so this very basic objective measure, yeah, should be put at the core of our regulations. Of course, we need to discuss it, test it, etc. But whenever I have any kind of energy transition initiative, yeah, if it overpass, yeah, the safe operating space, yeah, I think that we have here, around the own definition of planetary boundaries, we have here some boundaries to create our regulatory policies.
Thank you so much, professors.